Resilience and leadership, right? We talk about this on some of the different episodes, but I always love the perspective that each guest brings to this because it's a different answer from every person. And I think that um, this is such a foundational question when you think of leadership as a whole. Um, it's critical trait for leaders in any field. Can you share your insights on how leaders can cultivate this resilience themselves and the teams, especially in times of significant change and challenge? Because regardless of what field you're in, there is change. Change is it's constant. What advice, how can we talk about that from your experience? Um, and what can you share about it?
Well, I think the reality is there's two types of resiliency, right? There's the mental resiliency, and then there's also the physical resiliency. So within the SEAL teams, you learn both. You learn that your mind is in control of your body, and when the two are aligned, you can go beyond anything you've ever thought possible. And so, and what I even find interesting is sometimes even when your resiliency from a mental standpoint isn't as high as it should be, the resiliency from a physical level will push you beyond, right? Because you've already kind of established those lines. And it goes both the other way as well. Sometimes you don't think your body can go anymore, but because your mind is so resilient, you're going to push your body further than it could ever go possible. I think from more of a individual standpoint, that is built internally and, with the support of people around you. I think from a more team perspective, you really have to foster a culture of trust and accountability, right? I think that is essential to build resiliency. I mean, if your leaderships demonstrate transparency, they demonstrate honesty, reliability, you start to trust them more. You're able to have those open conversations with them, you communicate. All of that is a big part of building resilience. If I'm a leader and I tell you to do something and then I'm not right beside you, I just broke your trust. And then that becomes very problematic. I always say, like, if you're in the trenches with your boys, that will build resiliency within your team because they see you doing exactly what you say you're going to be doing. So, like in the battlefield, when I was first, my very first deployment, I was the number one or number two man in the door every single time. And so when someone else was asked to do that, and maybe you saw a little bit of hesitancy, or they're like, "Oh," I walk up and go, "Hey, man, it's all good, bro. Like, yeah, you're in the fatal funnel. Things can go bad, but don't think about that. Think about this. Here's what I do." And so you're able to have those discussions, those conversations, right? And it builds that resiliency within that individual from a personal level, but also at that team level. When they see you elevate above, the people below you will elevate with you. As a leader, if you're not as resilient, then your people aren't as resilient. And that's the psychological aspect of it, right? If they see a very strong leader break, the people below you will break. And so, that's why it's so important to be, as a leader, to have really high both emotional and physical resiliency, right? And then have that team, those group of strong individuals that'll help you do that. Because again, like, it's really interesting. We have discussions peer to peer as you move up or you move with your mentor, but a lot of times, you don't, from the downward perspective, your job is to bring everybody up underneath you and elevate them. And that can be difficult sometimes. Maybe you come in and you're not as resilient, but then, you see somebody in your team, man, is just happy, smiling, and they lift you up, man. And you're like, whoa, okay, I'm a whole new person right now just because of that individual. So it goes, the levels of resiliency can be multifaceted. I mean, resiliency is, I've learned that, at even my lowest times, I was the most resilient that I've ever been in my entire life. And I've persevered through it, which also will build not only that cohesiveness in the team, but it really builds up your personal, I guess you could say, it's kind of like every single person has an internal way that they think about themselves. There's insecurities, there's all of those emotions that go through your mind, right? But when you break, these really, and you break them down and you're like, okay, I passed that one, I did this one, I did that one. It tends to build that resilience. Yeah, you may fail, but by this time you've already built, a very strong foundation. You're like, all right, well, next time I'm gonna, and you just keep going. And then you have your team underneath you, like clapping and pushing you above and beyond, right? And so, on the battlefield, that's important, but also in the boardroom. If your guys are there from 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and you're right there with them, oh my gosh, man, that team is going to love you. They're going to be like, man, he was there with me. He's a strong leader. And that just builds that, really strong team cohesiveness and resiliency within your team. When they see you struggling and they're, in the trenches with them, it's a pretty phenomenal thing to watch.
Yeah, I through shared hardships, right? I think that's I think
Absolutely.
that's I think that's what I've heard through the different learnings that I've had is team growth and trust comes through shared hardships. And
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, there's that aspect, but there's also that personal aspect of resiliency,
yeah,
right? Because the reality is this: you can have a lot of individuals that are lifting you up, but you also have to have that personal and internal resiliency yourself. I mean, that's why, during our programs, guys ring the bell. You would not believe how many people are behind them saying, no, man, don't do it. Get back here with us, right? And I mean, they're really like, no, because the guy, maybe he's an incredible man, and he just had a tough day, and you're there to, boost him up, and he still goes and rings that bell, man. Again, that's that internal resiliency. And it didn't matter how strong your team was there cheering you on to not do it, man. Guys, just so like I said, it's resiliency is so multifaceted, especially within our organization. In the military organization, it's multifaceted. I think, in the corporate world, if your leaders are resilient, they're strong, they're there with you side by side, you have a personal relationship with them, you can talk to them, they're open, they're transparent, all of those things will build that resiliency in a team.
yeah, that I mean that I don't know how I have zero to add to that other than yes and yes some more. Um, that was fantastic, and I think it's super important to have resilient leaders and resilient members on a team. And for those people who have less resilience, it's important to remember to bring them along with you.
Yeah.
Like that's
And then
that's
give them the tools, man, to build that resiliency. Sometimes it just takes a couple little big coaching sessions, or like, hey, here's some things you can do. Here's how you can build your resiliency. Here's how, and then, find that mentor that can help you out, get back in. There's just, like I said, it's multifaceted. I can't get into all of this. I mean, I could talk probably 5 or 6 hours on resiliency and how to become more resilient. I mean, that's the reality. But because it's so multifaceted, and what I find even more fascinating from a psychological aspect is every single individual is different, and you have to really find what resonates with that individual, and then how you're going to utilize what you learn about that individual to lift them to the next level. That's what really makes a good leader into a great leader, is a leader that really understands his people, takes the time to get to know them, and then really utilizes a lot of skill sets that he has to elevate that individual. Super important.
you got to know your people.
Got to know your people.
You got to know your people. That and not only do you got to know your people, you got to know your people when they get decentralized, right? Because that's even
Mm-hmm.
more important. So when you get into a decentralized leadership model, knowing your people is even more important because you got to know when they're off and you got to know when they're ticking and when you get a little vibration hum out in the ecosystem that may be not right.